Hello, welcome to your last PowerPoint. This is Dr. Moyer, and this PowerPoint will be discussing various forms of sexual coercion, including intimate partner violence, what is referred to as IPV, sexual assault, and rape. So here's the overview. We'll talk about how people end up in violent relationships, some of the statistics on the seriousness of the issue, types of violent relationships, making sense of IPV, leaving an intimate terrorist, which I'll define for you, support services, shelters, warning signs. And then we'll talk about sexual assault and rape, some statistics, what to do if you've been assaulted, and how to help others. So intimate partner violence is a very serious issue. Sometimes you have probably heard of this as either domestic violence, relationship violence, partner abuse, domestic abuse, spousal abuse, even battering is sometimes used as a term. There are lots of different terms, and that's important to know if you ever do research on this topic, because the terms matter. You won't find things if you don't use the right terminology. But generally, we try to use IPV, which does encompass everything. So even people that aren't married, people that are dating, and also partners of the same and opposite sex. So how do people end up in violent relationships? I like to start with this topic because a lot of times people really think, my students in particular, there's no way they're going to end up in a violent relationship. In fact, if I ask them to raise their hand if they think they're going to, when we're in class, almost all of them will raise their hand like, no, I don't. And I think that's interesting because we're not prepared for it. And so that's an important point to remember. When it does happen, honestly, people don't really know how to deal with it. That men and women both, they're not prepared for it, they're not expecting it. Relationships don't start out violent. There are some warning signs we'll talk about, but typically it's a relationship and it may move quickly, but usually both people say they're in love and they're happy, and then you'll see evidence of some type of abusive behaviors down the line, but by then the person's already involved in the relationship and it's hard to get out. If you've ever tried to leave any relationship, a friendship, even like a hairdresser relationship or changing babysitters, it's not easy to do that. And some people will do anything to avoid having to do that. So just keep that in the back of your mind. One of the main reasons that people aren't prepared is due to the types of stories that were read to as children. And I'm not trying to knock fairy tales. I love fairy tales. I love movies about fairy tales. But I am trying to say that the kind of stories that we read to children always have a happy ending. And Prince Charming, sometimes he can be portrayed as kind of controlling. He always takes charge. He saves the day, swoops in. He's the hero. And so it's not really unusual for people to expect their partner to be like that. But we don't expect Prince Charming to be a son of a bitch that hits. So when it happens, it can be very confusing. So how big is this issue? Well, every 9 seconds, a woman in the United States is assaulted by her partner. Every day, 4 women are murdered by a boyfriend or a husband in the United States. Experts indicate that 1 in every 4 women will be victimized by some form of IPV at some point in her lifetime. And almost a third of female homicide victims are killed by their intimate partner. 76% of females that were killed by their partners were first stalked by the person that killed them, which is why stalking is such an important behavior to pay attention to. Most women that end up being killed by their partner are in the process of leaving the relationship or have already left the relationship. So 75% of women that are killed by their partner are taking steps to leave or have already left the relationship, indicating that this is actually a really dangerous time for women. And so you have to be careful. Can't just get up and leave. There are steps that have to be taken. There are agencies that can go over safety planning with victims and how to do that, how to get out safely without putting other people at risk. More statistics. Women of all races are equally vulnerable to violence by an intimate partner, as are women of all socioeconomic statuses and women of all levels of self-esteem. You see a lot of women in lower socioeconomic statuses seeking help from local agencies because they don't have the financial resources to get help on their own. If somebody is from a higher SES, socioeconomic status, they oftentimes have more resources and have more choices about how they can get out. Sorry, a little stuffed up. So that's another thing to be, thinking about, considering. The self-esteem thing, I hate. It's my biggest pet peeve, is when somebody says, well, it's women that have low self-esteem that get into violent relationships. That's actually not true, and there's not research to support that. What there is research to support is that after being in a violent relationship for a number of years, the self-esteem does take a hit. And that's where that stereotype began. But it has nothing to do with somebody's self-esteem in the beginning. It can be battered over time. 3/4 of lesbians report they have defended themselves or fought back against an abusive partner. 1 out of 14 men has been physically assaulted by a current or former female partner. 40%, so almost half, of gay and bisexual men are abused by an intimate partner. And we need to remember that men are less likely than women to seek assistance for IPV, so these statistics concerning men may not be entirely accurate. The issue could be much bigger than we think, but without the research, the crime statistics, we can't say that with confidence. Okay, so what is violent behavior? It encompasses more than just physical violence. There can be emotional, mental, sexual, stalking, control tactics, destruction of property or pets, and even spiritual abuse. Physical abuse, of course, is anything physical. Punching, hitting, kicking, choking, beating up, using a weapon, even holding somebody down or refusing to take them to get treatment if they need help, if they're sick or injured. Emotional and mental abuse is more verbal. It's using words of hate and name-calling and convincing somebody they're crazy and they're overreacting to the abuse in the relationship. This is where the self-esteem takes a hit. They may be told they're stupid and dumb, fat, no one's ever going to love them, they're gross, they're just not good relationship material, and they have to stay in the relationship if they want to be with somebody. Sexual behavior, violent behavior, includes sexual assault and rape. We'll talk more about that at the end of this PowerPoint. It can also include having intercourse with somebody that's not even conscious, making a partner do things sexually that they are not comfortable with. So anything that's sexual and that is forced is considered a violent sexual behavior. Stalking, I think most of you are familiar with that. With cell phones, stalking is taken on a whole new level. Back in my day, stalking was unwanted phone calls, unwanted mail, unwanted visits, sending notes, flowers, gifts, etc. But now with cell phones, you can actually text, and you can try to track people down, and you can follow them on social media. So lots of different ways to stalk, which makes it, of course, much more dangerous. And then there are control tactics. These are tactics that somebody uses against a partner to try to control everything they do. It can be financial control, so controlling how much money they actually have. Even if they work, they may have to give some money to their partner if he's abusive or she's abusive. Using children as a form of control to get at the partner. The abuser oftentimes will use children as a tool, a pawn. Also using threats, using sexual and physical violence, using intimidation, trying to convince somebody that they're crazy, so that if they say, well, I want to talk about this, what's been going on. Oh, there's nothing going on, nothing to worry about. Even using the male hierarchy in society, so male privilege, which can allow men to support their behavior by saying, I'm the man, I'm supposed to be in charge, you have to do what I say. So lots of different control tactics. They may come in various forms, but at the heart, it's all about control and manipulation and coercion. And once you understand that, you recognize it when you see it. The destruction of property or pets is just that. Many abusers will threaten to destroy things, including pets, in order to control their partner. And many women have indicated they've stayed in an abusive relationship because of pets. They've either seen the pet abused or seen a pet killed by their partner, and they don't want that to happen again. Shelters won't take women and children if they have a pet. They'll take the women and children, but not the pet. So it can be difficult if she's trying to get out and there are pets involved. She may have to make the choice to leave the pet, or sometimes battered women's organizations have foster families that will take on pets while women and children are in shelter. And then finally, spiritual abuse. This is not a new type of abuse, but it's a new behavior as far as listing abusive behavior. So using religion to justify abuse, using the Bible or beliefs and saying I'm allowed to do this because I'm your husband. Devaluing somebody's spiritual beliefs, not allowing them to observe spiritual holidays or events, destroying spiritual items, anything to do with spirituality and religion, and using it as a way to control somebody. So I've been mentioning that women can be perpetrators. We went into that with statistics earlier. And I just want to be clear about this so that you guys are clear. So research has indicated that women are just as aggressive as men when it comes to the frequency of sexual assaults, and that sometimes women even use more severe physical violence against partners than men do. Sometimes women are the only ones that are aggressive in their intimate relationship, so the argument that she's only using it to protect herself isn't accurate for all situations. And we also know that lesbian couples engage in relationship aggression where there's no men in the relationship. There are a number of reasons for this, and if you think about this really carefully, it makes sense. When I indicated that sometimes women use more severe forms of violence, even are more likely to use a weapon than men, there's a huge size and muscle differential between men and women most of the time. So men are much stronger than women on average. She needs a weapon and she needs to use more severe forms of violence if she is becoming violent toward her partner, whether it's for self-defense or whether it is just straight out abuse. So that makes sense. But the most important thing to remember is that women are more likely to be injured or killed. And I can't emphasize this enough. So if you're going to talk about men and women using aggression at equal rates, you must always follow up with, ethically, you must always follow up with, but women are more likely to be injured or killed. And that's a critical point, and that's why we have resources for women. So some other gender differences that I think are important. Women are more negatively affected than men when they are the victim. So the effects on the victim are worse for women compared to men. And women are affected more negatively even when they are the perpetrator. So when they're the one doing the abuse, they report emotional distress about it. They know it's wrong. They don't like it. They're not comfortable in that position. They may feel they don't have any other choice sometimes, but that's another issue. The point is, even when victimized or perpetrating, women suffer more. Women are less likely to be the only aggressor in the relationship, also important. And they're more likely to use violence only after their partner has used psychological, physical, or sexual aggression against them. So these are important differences. You can't just throw everybody in one pot and say it's all the same, because it's not. And Mike Johnson came up with a typology that helps explain some of these gender differences. And he went so far as to say that the research that was being conducted and that's being published as early as the 1970s was looking at two very different types of samples. They were either nationally representative samples, where phones A phone would dial randomly a number and people participate in a survey if they agreed to. Or even randomized college student samples. And then there were the women that were seeking shelter or services from battered women's shelters. And Mike Johnson pointed out, you can't take all those people and put them in the same category because you're talking about very different types of samples. And he pointed out that probably in the nationally representative samples, and this has since been supported with research, but at the time it was a theory, that situational couple violence is what was going on when it showed that men and women were perpetrating violence at equal rates. And then if you looked at the shelter samples, you were finding intimate terrorism and violent resistance. So let's define what these are. Situational couple violence is the type of violence that's used only in the context of a fight or an argument, and there are no controlling behaviors that accompany this violence. Males and females are equally likely to perpetrate situational couple violence, and it can be unidirectional or bidirectional, meaning one or both can be involved. I put only in fights in pink. It's important to remember this is not a controlling type of relationship, but rather somebody using violence in a relationship because they don't know how to engage in conflict in a healthy manner. It's not to say that it's not important, and it's not to say that it's not dangerous, because it is, and people have died because of situational couple violence or been injured very seriously. But it is important policy-wise and treatment-wise, intervention-wise, to distinguish between the two, because it's not motivated by control. Intimate terrorist, on the other hand, is motivated by control. It's all about power and control. And I will post the power and control wheel on D2L. I can't remember if I have already, but I will. This is the kind of violence you see exemplified in movies, like Enough with Jennifer Lopez, Sleeping with the Enemy, Julia Roberts, Reese Witherspoon and Mark Wahlberg in Fear. You see this exhibited a lot in extreme examples, but it doesn't have to be extreme, and it doesn't have to include physical violence. It's all about the power and the control. So 95% of the perpetrators are male. That means only 5% of perpetrators are female. So females are not as likely to engage in this kind of violence. And it's unidirectional. So there's one clear victim, one clear perpetrator. The violent resistance refers to someone that's using violence to protect themselves, their children, their pets, their property from an intimate terrorist. I put self-defense in pink because this is how you can think of this. Because it is a form of self-defense, 95% of the perpetrators are female, and it's considered bidirectional because the perpetrator is using violence against a violent partner. So there's two people engaged in violent behaviors. But it's kind of like a technicality. You got to think about that carefully. I've done a lot of research on intimate partner violence, and in 2006 I did research with Eastern students, women in particular, only women, and I asked them about if they've ever used violence, and I had some open-ended items. And you can see it was easy to classify these for me, knowing the theory. I mean, if you read these two scripts, they're very different. I have slapped my boyfriend in the face before. I did it because I was frustrated with him. We were fighting and he wouldn't let me talk, and everything I said, he went back against me. I didn't mean to do it. It was kind of a reaction to being mad and frustrated. Versus, I was married to my high school sweetheart for 3 years. I was hit, belittled, yelled at, not trusted, and had to account for every minute of my day. So when you're talking about both these women using violence and explaining why they did it, the question was, why did you do it? You can see they have very different reasonings. One centered around the aspect of control here, power and control. One without power and control, more about conflict tactic scales. So how do you leave an intimate terrorist? Most of the research we have focuses on leaving intimate terrorists, not situational couple violent perpetrators. This is primarily because leaving a situational couple violence perpetrator is not as dangerous and is not as scary because there's that lack of control going on. It's just a matter of ending the relationship, which is difficult to do. And it can be dangerous if the person reacts with anger and violence. So there still should be caution exercised. There are resources still that can be used to leave any violent relationship. It doesn't matter what kind it is. And I will point those out in a moment. So remember, it's hard to leave any relationship. Best friend, hairdresser, your neighbor, babysitter, whatever the case may be. But for intimate terrorists, there are 4 main reasons why it's hard. There's fear for the victims. And I point out again that most women are killed when they're trying to leave. They're also worried about more violence, losing custody of their children, being alone, not being in a relationship, and even dying. And then the resources, it's highly likely they're dependent on their partner for resources because the abuser is the one that's doing all the control. So money, the house, a car, healthcare benefits, dental benefits, etc. She may be afraid to leave because of that. Then there's beliefs. The belief that love conquers all. I can fix this if I just love them hard enough or more, or if I do this, if I. Well, it's not about the victim's behavior. It's about the abuser's behavior. And then religious beliefs can also intertwine here. People may think, oh, well, God wants me to be with this person, or my higher power says that, I only have one soulmate. It could be hard. A lot of people stay for these very reasons. And then even pressure from society to stay in the relationship, which can even come from family, friends, church pastor. You'd be surprised how many people will say, what did you do? Engaging in what I call victim blaming, indicating that she did something that caused it, which is untrue. Violence is always a choice that the perpetrator makes. Always. No if, and, or but about it. Chooses to use violence. We know this because he's able to stop when the police show up or a neighbor shows up. He tends to only use violence against his partner, not everyone in general. And he leaves bruises and marks, injuries, typically in places where clothing covers it. So that describes to me a very calculating, manipulative type of violence that is not something that's out of control or due to alcohol and drugs. Here are some of the services and support for IPV victims and survivors. And again, it doesn't matter what kind of violent relationship you're in. You can seek assistance from any domestic violence agency. There are hotlines. They offer typically counseling, support groups. They can help you legally, and they can even advocate for you in court. There's oftentimes life skills training involved or education. Shelters, usually a big part of a domestic violence agency, and sometimes even transitional housing. I mentioned earlier we would talk about warning signs. Here they are. Yes to even one indicates abuse in the relationship, so you don't have to have 3 or more. Any of these are abusive behavior. And it should be a warning sign. It should be a red flag. Particularly if you are starting to feel like you can't do anything because they're controlling everything you do. You need to be very careful about that and seek help and go over safety planning with somebody on a domestic violence hotline that can go over with you how to do that. Okay, sexual assault and rape. Statistics on date rape. So 84% of women that have been sexually assaulted say they knew their attacker. So it's less likely to be the stranger, more likely to be someone they know. 75% of the men and 55% of the women involved in date rape have been drinking or using drugs before the attack. The only reason I point this out is because a lot of times women feel like they can't report it because they had been drinking or using drugs. Doesn't mean they wanted to be sexually assaulted or raped. And even in some states, like the state of Illinois, if a woman is, or a man is, completely intoxicated, they can't give consent. The law says they can't give consent. So if somebody engages in sex with them, they're not they're not doing it with the victim's consent. So just please know that that's not a reason not to report it. And don't blame yourself. If you were drinking or using drugs, it doesn't mean that you walked around saying, yeah, I'd love to be raped. That's not the case. I know that sounds silly, but people do engage in self-victim blaming a lot. Just to make that point, doesn't matter whether you know your attacker or not. No means no. And rape is a choice the rapist makes. So again, we're talking about deliberate behavior. It may not seem that way, but it is. Nothing that a man or a woman does invites rape, no matter what. So what is sexual assault? Most people are pretty clear on what rape is. Having forced intercourse with somebody against their will. You don't have to have a weapon. There can be just the threat of worry of injury if you do try to resist. Sexual assault includes just touching, forcing a person to join into unwanted sexual contact or attention. Can include vaginal, anal, or oral penetration, not just with a penis, but with objects, with fingers, etc. Sexual intercourse that you say no to. Rape, attempted rape, and even just being molested. What to do if you have been raped or sexually assaulted by somebody. Know that the rape or assault, and it should be stranger too, not just friend, date, partner. Excuse me. Know that the rape or assault was not your fault, no matter what. Because it's very easy to engage in that. I shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't have done that. I wore this. I drank that. No. I don't care if you ran naked down the street, danced at a party naked. You did not ask to be assaulted. If the attack just occurred, it's important not to wash or change clothes or douche or shower. You don't want to wash away or tamper with any potential evidence. At the very least, if you go home and you're not ready to call the police or report it, put your clothes, everything you had on that day, in a separate bag. Don't wash them and set them aside, because at the very least that can have evidence on it. It may contain the perpetrator's DNA and semen. So at the very least, that would be an important step to take. If you're feeling comfortable enough to call the police and go to the emergency room, I would call a rape crisis center first, like SACUS, because you can have somebody go with you to the police, go with you to the hospital, and they're going to advocate for you. They know your rights, and they're going to make sure that you are not forced to do anything or say anything that you're not comfortable with. That would be my first step. And then they can go with you and you don't feel alone. If the attack did not just occur, you can still contact a rape crisis center and ask them about, whether or not they offer support. I'm sure they do offer support. And what kinds of choices you have in regards to reporting. It's not always about reporting. And I don't want to seem like I'm putting just the emphasis on that. But the best way to stop this kind of behavior is to make sure it doesn't happen again. We don't, lay the foundation to make it easy for it to happen. And paper trails can be very important for this. 5 reasons to think about, at least, reporting. Your statement can help build a case against a perpetrator should they be accused again. So even if the police say, look, there's not enough evidence, this happened 2 years ago, we'll take down your statement, but we're not going to prosecute. Well, at least your statement's there. It gives you the opportunity to seek justice. Speaking up about it is one way to take control back. You'll receive information about support services in the area oftentimes once you do report. And perpetrators are typically repeat offenders. And they're probably going to do it again. So if your statement's out there, they do it again, now there's 2 people that have reported it, and it's more likely to be prosecuted and more likely that he will end up either in jail or at least on some type of sexual offender list. The choice is ultimately up to the victim. And the victim should not be pressured into doing things they don't want to do. Part of the empowerment is taking control of how you respond to the situation. So having somebody just say, okay, we're going to the police, I don't care what you say, that's not allowing the victim to have a choice. So again, if that's, I've been sexually assaulted, I didn't shower. I did shower and I didn't save my clothes. I did everything that you're not supposed to do, because I know now what it feels like. And it's not, you just want to get clean. You just want everything associated with that crime off you and gone, which can make it difficult to prosecute later. But, the choice is up to the victim. I would say if I knew now, thinking back about just saving my clothes, I might have done that. But at the time I was thinking only about the evidence that was on me. And I certainly wasn't going to go to the hospital and have people probe between my legs again after I have just been assaulted. So anyways, that's my story. But people have their own stories, their own lives, their own situations, and they get to decide how they deal with it. Oftentimes people ask me, well, what can I do to help my friend, my relative, my sorority sister, my coworker, my mother, whatever the case may be? The most important thing you can do is listen. They may tell their story to you over and over again, and you every time probably want to say you need to get help, but you really can't force somebody to do that. So what you can do is you can listen. You can reassure them that it wasn't their fault no matter what they tell you. Don't be judgmental. Don't ask what they did, what they were wearing, where they were, why they didn't do this. It's not about you're asking the wrong questions. It's not about what the victim did. It's about what the perpetrator did. Let them know if you're aware of resources like SACUS, let them know about it. Understand that if somebody is in an abusive relationship, it can take time to leave. Leaving is actually a process. And if you understand that, it makes it easier to get why people go back. Each time a woman leaves an abusive relationship or a man leaves an abusive relationship, they're learning more about themselves and what kind of resources they have. So if they do go back, they have still learned something from that previous leaving, and that's just going to build confidence to eventually leave for good. Encourage your friend to seek help, but remember, you can't force them. Just as a community member in general, educate others about the issue, clarify misconceptions and stereotypes, volunteer at an organization that works with victims, or even donate clothing, items they need. Gas cards are always good. Walmart cards are good. That way victims can get, I don't want to say victims, survivors, clients can get whatever they want. And refuse to tolerate jokes or language that trivialize the issue. Because when you look on the continuum of oppression, that's where it starts. When we tolerate jokes or language that trivialize the issue, we're opening the door for other types of oppression to occur. I'm not going to laugh at that. I don't think that's funny. Intimate partner violence is not something that I joke about. And I don't. And when people refer to, I was wearing a wife beater shirt, I've even said, I don't find that appropriate to call it, it's a white tank top, call it a white tank top. It doesn't have to be called a wife beater. And when it is referred to that way, it's almost as though it's funny and it's a joke. And I don't find anything funny about it. Some good resources, and it's always good when you're going to be working with individuals and families to have lists of resources sorted by the issue on hand, so that if somebody does ask, you have a file you can pull up, or you have handouts, whatever the case may be. Here's some of our local stuff at the beginning, including the EIU counseling services at the end. But the national networks, there you can call them or go to their website and find local resources. So that concludes my lecture on sexual coercion and my lectures for the semester. I feel like I'm talking to you guys when I make these. I'm going to miss making them. But They're always going to be up on YouTube, so if you need to go back, particularly to this one, I know this is kind of a topic that hits pretty close to home for a lot of people. I don't take them down, so it's always there if you need to share it with somebody else. Please feel free to do so. Okay, thank you.